Today is June 23rd, 1995. I'm again speaking with Herb Maker at his home in Bend, Oregon. We're speaking again about his experiences with the Shevlin-Hixon Logging and Lumber Company of Bend, Oregon. This is tape number 8 of the Shevlin-Hixon Brooks Scanlon Oral History Project. My name is Ron Gregory, and the tape belongs to me. Okay, Herb, when I last talked to you a couple of weeks ago, we just finished talking about the housing situation in the camps. I'd like to move now to what the cookhouse situation was. Can you tell me about the cookhouse, for example, how large it was?
Well, it was on railroad wheels on the railroad, and it was approximately, the cookhouse, I would say, was probably 50 foot long. Then adjoining that, they had a supplier store, a storeroom, for food and whatnot. They had cold storage as it was then. I don't know what all it was they had, but they used to get fresh meat. And they had these big iron stoves that heated them with wood, and just like a big grill. And they had ovens on those big stoves, and they cooked all the meals right there for the men. And then at night they had, 2 or 3 fellows that had baked cakes, cookies, and all that thing for the lunches.
So there were more than one cook involved?
Oh, yes. They had the first and second cooks, They
keep them pretty busy?
Oh, yes, they did. You bet they did. They had to get up real early in the morning to get breakfast started for those fellows, and I'm not sure whether they made the lunches the night before or early in the morning, but they made the lunches for the fellows. And they never had a hot coffee or anything for them.
At lunchtime, or
no, they did. They had everything to make it, and they'd take it out in the woods wherever they were. They'd make it right there, the coffee and things for them. And of course, they had all that hot water in the boilers there on the loading machine or on the train, and they really fed them good.
Yeah. Really, what was a bull cook?
A bull cook? Well, he was the head of it, the bull cook. He was, it seemed like every time they'd talk about the head of some department, they'd call him a bull cook.
Did this person have a lot of prestige or something?
Oh, yeah, he was a little bit higher than the average labor,
Why do you suppose that was?
Well, I guess they just had to have somebody in charge. That's what they do. And of course, they had foremans in the woods for the fallers. And they had a foreman on the loading machines, each one of those.
But the bull cook himself, that fella cooked also.
Yeah,
he wasn't just a foreman.
No, well, that's right. He was in charge of that part of the department.
Okay, well, you say that the cookhouse was on rails. It remained on rails all the time?
Yes, and the dining room, too. They usually had 2 dining rooms. And they had ladies they had several young ladies that did the waiting on the tables.
Were these single ladies?
Well, some of them were, and some of them weren't. And those dining cars were on wheels too. They were connected right with. They generally put 2 tracks in, and they'd run them alongside of each other. There'd be a dining room here, and the cookhouse here, and then the crossing here at this dining room.
Well, where did the single women stay?
Well, they had houses for them.
They had houses.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Okay, so it wasn't like a separate bunk area. They actually had a house themselves.
Oh, yeah,
and,
yeah,
and
yeah.
Did all of the female waitresses then kind of room together, or
Well,
how was it?
Usually, as I recall, they were related to some of the people in the camp. They stayed with them. They were their daughters or whatnot. They weren't their sisters or brothers, their sisters rather, and they were. And the cook, some of the cook's wives worked there, like the waitresses too.
Mm-hmm. Let me see.
And they had dishwashers. A young fellow did the dishes too.
Oh, he did. Okay. Well, I asked you about the bull cook. Did you ever hear the term crumb boss?
No.
Okay. I've come across it every once in a while in the literature,
Yeah.
and I'm not sure who that individual was. So
I have no idea.
Okay. Well, were all members of the community welcome to dine at the cookhouse?
No. They could, but they, like some fellow's wife and kids have gone someplace. Well, he could go down there and eat in there, but he paid for it, of course. They paid for it. I used to eat there quite a bit because I was single, and my sister, I stayed with her and her husband quite a bit, and then they'd be gone while I'd go up there and get my lunch and eat up there.
This was when you were a young man.
Yeah.
What was the food like?
Well, it was good. It was good food, you bet. Yeah.
What kinds of things did they serve? You remember?
They had steaks for dinner, and they'd have, of course, mashed, but all the stuff that you'd have at home. It was really, only it was done in a large quantity.
Fellas eat a lot.
Yeah, and the pastries and stuff. They had pies, cakes, cookies, and just some of those fellows, those loggers, you couldn't imagine how much food they put away. I know when they finally pretty much got rid of the cookhouse, they just have it for a few people. They didn't have. And the men would eat at the different families. And they had a little dining room set up for them, and they do their cooking. And I know this one fellow, maybe I just mentioned that he'd get one of those big lunch pails like this. I guess it would hold a big thermos bottle, but that was his lunch. And this young kid, I know he did the same thing, but instead of putting the thermos bottle in the top, he'd get one, what we call 2-bit cakes. He'd get a cake from the store, a bakery big cake. They were just enough to fit inside there. I never saw anybody that could eat like those two guys.
But this was after, you say, the cookhouse was pretty much gone?
The cookhouse stayed there. Shorty Wilson took care of the cookhouse, and it was very small then. I mean, the cookhouse was probably the same size, but the dining area was just a small part of the kitchen.
What point in time do you think that was?
Well, let's see. That probably was after. I think it was just about the time the war broke out that they started that.
Okay, so was the cookhouse kind of being phased out or something at that time, or?
Well, the big dining room was, yeah. They eliminated that, and the mill people, the logging people from Bend, the officials, when they'd come out, they'd always come out there and have dinner, and the logging superintendent, he ate up there.
Was this Jack Meister?
It was Stanley Linton.
Okay.
But Jack Meister used to come out there, and of course he'd eat, and sometimes if he'd coming out to see George and I, he'd bring a lunch, or like we'd be going down to Chemal and he'd want to see what we were doing, you know, because we had a big fire down there that we had to build roads into and whatnot.
Well, what were the breakfasts like? What did they serve?
Oh, ham and eggs and bacon and steak and just any, you know, it was a big meal for fathers. That was a big meal.
Particular time that breakfast was served? You needed to be there?
It seemed to me like it was about 5 o'clock when they rang the bell, or they had a siren too. They hand crank sirens, and the morning they blew the whistle from one of the locomotives. That I can't think of what. I guess it was about 5 o'clock. I guess they blow the whistle in the morning to wake the fellows up, and then about 5:30 or 6 they'd have their breakfast, and then they had to be at work in the woods by 8 o'clock.
And what about dinner? What time was dinner usually? Set time?
Oh, I'd say it was about 6 o'clock in that area.
Well, what was the atmosphere like in there? You say you ate in there a number of times.
Oh,
I mean, these are guys out of the woods.
yeah, they'd be in there just discussing their days, what they'd done and whatnot. Just like any group of fellows, they were all practically interested in the same thing, you know. And,
never got overly rowdy.
Oh no. They had their plates were this thick porcelain, real thick, and the cups were that mugs like, you know. They were really good material they were made of.
What color was it?
White.
White.
Mm-hmm. Kind of a grayish white.
Okay, kind of a granite ware.
Yeah, kind of like that. Yeah.
Okay. Did the company provide the meals for the men, or was it somehow deducted, or did they?
Well, yeah, it was taken out of their checks. Yeah.
Okay. Do you remember what the price of a meal was?
Boy, I don't, because when I ate up there, I never paid. Seems like it. I don't remember it ever being. Well, maybe I did. They might have taken it out of my check. They probably did. I don't. But they were good meals. I mean, they were really good meals.
You think you got your money's
Oh,
worth?
yeah, you bet. They got all they wanted to eat, that's for sure.
Were there any special kind of features for storing quantities of cookhouse food? You had mentioned.
Well, they had one of those cars about the size of the kitchen. The kitchen had all windows along the sides, and the storeroom, they'd bring a railroad car of the groceries and stuff right up there and spot it right at the end of the storehouse, or where they stored their food, and it was orderly. I mean, all that stuff was on shelves and everything. It was quite a deal. And then they had a big root cellar. Great.
They had a cellar.
And they had the potatoes and all the vegetables and stuff like that in there. And the other side, I assume they stored a lot of the canned goods too down there. I don't know. But they got things, instead of getting them in these little cans, they got in gallon cans. And you may have found some of their can dumps up there.
So the root cellars for the cookhouse must have been pretty substantial.
Yeah, it was. It was quite large, you know. It was
How were those excavated? Do you recall?
by hand.
By hand?
Oh, yeah. At that time, they didn't have any backhoes or anything like that. It was,
I thought maybe there'd have been like a steam shovel or something
well,
like that.
they did have a shovel, but I don't recall them digging it with that. I was quite young at that time, but I don't know, because when I went to work, why the camp stayed there, it stayed there. I think it only moved once while I was working there. Moved from, well, no, it did. It was a Lapine, and I went in the service for Lapine. I worked there until I went in the service. And then when I came back, they were down at the Summit Stage Station. And it was all set up, so I don't don't know how they did that.
Okay. You mentioned, a lot of food. Was there a lot of waste?
Well, naturally there was quite a bit. They had a big, it wasn't too big, a wagon that had iron wheels on it, and it was made of wood, the box on it, and they just backed that right underneath in the cookhouse there where they put all the waste into it. Mm-hmm. And the waste that went into that was food and stuff, because they had a pig pen down there that they raised pigs, and they butcher once a week. They butcher 1 or 2 hogs for their pork, and that's how they got rid of that waste food that was raised in those pigs.
What about the cans and the bottles? Where did they go?
I was trying to think. They didn't go in that. I know. I guess they must have had another wagon to haul. They pulled the wagon with a horse. They had the horses, and they pulled that, and they take them out to where they dumped their cans, generally on the edge of a hill where you roll down over it. Then.
Was this at some distance from the camp or the cookhouse?
Well, no, the can dump wasn't. It was less than a quarter of a mile, but the pig pen was down maybe a half a mile from the camp.
If visitors dropped by the camp, could they eat at the cookhouse? Was it kind of open to the public?
Well, in that respect, I'm sure they could. They used to, I'm sure. A lot of those, I should say, the officials from the mill would come out and whatnot. They would eat there. And if anybody came with them, they could eat with it too. But there wasn't too many people that came out there but what they were to see somebody, either some family or something. But the officials from the mill, they would come out, and they come out quite regularly. They had a timekeeper there in the post office, and of course they'd come out. They'd bring the paychecks out they paid every month, as I recall, and they had a security man that investigated if any fires or anything in the woods. Why, he was always out to investigate it, make sure it wasn't arson and something like that. Or the loggers were lax in some way. And that's about those guys would eat. Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the camp and the cookhouse having pigs, but no other animals aside from the horses for the work crew, no cattle or chickens or anything like that.
No, some of the families that lived there had chickens, but I don't know, not very many of them did.
So they had like a pigsty, any kind of shelters or anything for the pigs?
Oh yeah, they had corrals made there and little sheds for them.
Who took care of the animals?
They had a man that took care of all the slop, as they call it, slop wagon down there, and then they'd get potatoes and boil a lot of potatoes and feed them too. And as I recall, they'd kill them down there and scrape them, put them in these vats and scrape the hair off of them, and then hang them up in a cooler there, and then they'd hang them up and take the entrails out of them first, and then they'd leave them in there to cool down. And there was a lady there, an Austrian lady. Whenever they was butchering hogs, she went to come down there with her bucket, and she'd get the blood, and she'd make blood sausage out of it. I never ate any, but some of those Austrian people said it was real good. And I imagine it was. This old Rosie Mazar, her name was. She was a good cook. She was an Austrian woman. She was a good cook.
Well, do you ever remember any problems with like vermin or coyotes around the dumps, or anybody complaining about that in the camp?
No, we never did. No.
Okay, so as far as the purchase or acquisition of food, where did that come from?
Well,
they had a store there, but I mean, in terms of these large quantities.
Well, that they'd send their. I don't know. I assume it was the bull cook or whoever in charge of the kitchen. He'd get a list and send it in, telephone it into the mill, and then they would pick it up, I suppose, in the stores in town. And then whoever the stores would bring it down, I assume, and put it in their railroad car, because it would be shipped back out. They had a warehouse in Bend that took care of the tools and like shovels, axes, and saws and things. And when they needed them, they sent them out, and they had a warehouse in the camp too, with axe handles and axes and all kinds of equipment in there. That they water bags. Each man had a water bag. If it got to leaking, well, they'd go get another one.
Why did each man have a water bag? What was that?
Well, that was, instead of carrying a canteen, that was a drinking water.
Okay.
And it was just a water bag because it would stay cool. Where a canteen
was it like what was the water
canvas,
bag made?
It was canvas,
the type of canvas water bag you used to put on the hood of your car?
Yeah,
kind of
like that, sure.
Okay.
Had a cork in it, stick a cork in a little round nail, yeah.
Okay. Well, before we move on from the cookhouse, just want to ask you one more thing. In looking through the literature, it oftentimes implies that the cook was always very busy. He was up before everybody else. He went to bed after everybody else because there was always this incredible amount of food that needed to be prepared. But it also kind of implies, the literature does, that many of them oftentimes had drinking problems, and that some would even have a still inside on the stove. Do you ever recall anything like that?
We never had it in Shevlin-Hixon. They didn't. I don't say they didn't allow it, but they didn't condone any of the people, working, drinking. There was none of that. If they did, they would either they'd stop or they'd eliminate their employment there.
Yeah. Okay. One of my reasons for asking is in talking with Clint, for example, he had mentioned that I think it was his Uncle Bill was a cook in one of the early camps. And Clint claims that this uncle was an alcoholic, for one thing, and that he'd take the potato peelings and fruit peelings and whatnot, and he'd just put them in a big vat.
He could have.
Yeah, and had it on the stove there, and that he said, Jack Meister, he used to come out all the time and in the early days, and one of the first things he'd do is go to Bill and ask him if he had a little brew. Yeah. And apparently this Uncle Bill was a good enough cook that they were willing to overlook that in his case.
Well, that's very, very true. I know he had Clint had probably was his great uncle. His name was Ross. He had a drinking problem, but they put up with it because Clint was a timekeeper there, and old Ross, it was just on weekends that he did it. But there was, of course, that was during Prohibition, and the only way they get it would be making it themselves. Yeah. So there wasn't very much there. But I know one fellow there, old Hugo Nast, would make home brew, and it wasn't that he would. He just made it for himself and his friends. It wasn't a case of where they get drunk or anything. They may have, but I didn't know it if they did.
Loggers like to drink?
Well, on Saturday nights they usually go to a dance or something, and they'd get to drinking too much, and their best friends they would fight with, And then when they'd sober up, why, they were friends.
Yeah, okay. But even during Prohibition and whatnot, company have a policy on liquor or anything in the camps?
No, to my knowledge they didn't. I don't know.
So as long as you were sober the next morning and able to
work, yeah. But you didn't. Now I know my brother-in-law worked on a railroad, and they were not supposed to go out in the woods unless it was two brakemen or a conductor and a brakeman on the engine and train. And I know one guy, my brother-in-law, used to cover up for him, and he'd come in and they had to sign in, and Ray used to put down that double his hours because he did all the work out there for two men, and he figured he was entitled to it. And Clint, Ray came about he wasn't going to do it.
This is Clint Sr.
Yeah, so Ray told him, he said, okay, whenever I go to work and that other guy isn't here, that brakeman, that engine will not leave the roundhouse. And this logging superintendent, Stanley Linton, I heard Clint arguing about it, that he shouldn't get it, and he didn't. He just did that once. Ray just said he wasn't going to take the engine out, and Linton asked him why, and he says, well, he's supposed to have two men, and if I'm going out there, I should get two men's pay. I'm not going to go out there and do all the work, and he gets paid for it, the other guy gets paid for it, and I do the work, and they're not supposed to do that. It was a policy, I guess a railroad policy, I don't know. So he got it straightened out. They had it all straightened out anyway. Took care of it. But there was the Van Tassels. They liked their liquor and they couldn't hold it too well, and they'd get just stinking drunk. And when they come to go to work, if they weren't there, why, some of the guys would cover up for them, take the job, and help them. But it got to be too much of a habit for Ray, and he said, I didn't do it anymore.
Well, you mentioned the roundhouse. Did most of the camps that you live in, did they have a roundhouse?
Oh, yeah.
They did, and that's where the locomotives
Yeah,
were
that's
stored?
where they put the locomotives in at night.
And did they do work on them there also?
No, they never did any work on them at the camp unless it was an emergency. But they would grease them, and those sidearms, they required a lot of grease. They'd go out the woods, and while they were tending the jammer, pulling the loads back out as they loaded them, while the engineer and fireman would go out and they had, I don't know if you ever seen them or not, there was a big nut on this kind of a bolt that went down in. They'd fill the holes in there with grease, and then they'd screw this down in there. And whenever they'd stop, they'd had the wrench and they'd loosen it and tighten it down so they get the grease in it, and then tighten it up. And then at night, the fellow worked at the roundhouse, he'd refill the grease on those. And they had oil cans, they'd go around and oil it too. You know.
So the roundhouse must have been a pretty big structure.
Well, yeah, it was. They could just run, well, some of them had 2 tracks running into it, and they usually had 4 engines out there, and they could store 4 engines down there.
Well, why did they call it a roundhouse?
Well, originally, the railroads, they had a roundhouse, and they were round. They'd run the engines. They had a turntable out here, and they'd run an engine in here, and then they'd run another on the turntable, and whichever hole they wanted it to, and it was round. And that's why these buildings weren't round that the Shevlins had. They were just a big building there that they built
for house the locomotives.
Yeah.
Well, that raises another question. How did they get the locomotives turned around then?
Well, they just run them straight into it. But turn around, they had Ys that they was running. They had in camp. They had Y. They train them up here and they make it around this way, and come back, and they was headed the other way.
Okay. How do you spell that Y?
I've surveyed a lot of them out, but how would you spell it?
W-Y-E?
That's probably right.
Okay.
I was thinking that was about right.
Okay. Well, that must have taken quite a bit of space
It did.
to get that thing turned around.
Yeah, I did. It wasn't too much, because those engines, they were not too long, you know. But they would just come up here and out like this and come right back on the track. And they had them in camp where maybe just run out the woods this way and it come around and go out this way, and then they had another and come down here to the roundhouse. And it was, I know right out here at Lava Junction, went out there and put in a Y because they had to change the engines. They had to, on the old railroad going up by Benham Falls, they had to use two engines to push them up the hill usually. So we had to put a Y in up this. The engine could turn around and come back down. The head down, and that was the only reason we put that one in there, because it had some engines.
Well, did the Y generally take up pretty much the space of a camp, you suppose?
Oh, no.
No.
It didn't take that much.
Okay, well, when you moved camp from one location to another, did Shevlin-Hixon have a policy or a procedure for dealing with the refuse that had accumulated over time and was being left behind?
I don't believe so. It seems to me like that people would have their trash or anything, they'd haul it out on a little road and dump it. And you'll see a lot of that out there, I'm sure. I probably it's gone now, but I mean mostly.
So the folks didn't necessarily have any designated dump site themselves?
No, they had cesspools, we call them. Mm-hmm. And that
These
would
were
take
slop holes?
Yeah, that would take care of anything but like cans. They usually hung a gunny sack on a post and filled that up with the cans.
And bottles.
And bottles, yeah, that's right. And then they take them out to the dump, as they call it. But there was no way they didn't, to my knowledge, they never buried them or anything. It was just left there to deteriorate, which it did.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now, let me see if I'm not sure that I'm getting this straight. As far as the folks taking their gunny sacks out, did they take them out to a designated place, or did they might just go down the road and just shake them out in the woods?
Road and throw them out.
Okay.
And back off the road a little ways and throw them out there.
So there might not be just a great big dump somewhere. There might just be spots of cans and bottles wherever people decided to deposit them.
Yeah, they'd clean up chips where they'd cut the wood and stuff. Usually a lot of it they burned too. A lot of things that would burn, they'd burn it.
Okay, well,
right at the camp, right in there, like that.
Because that raises another question, is because oftentimes when I've been out surveying or whatever, I come across areas of relatively large can scatters, and I'm never sure what those would be, because they are concentrated.
Yeah, well, that's a lot of, they did that. A lot of, a place that was easy to get to and off the road a little, they do that. But the can dumps from the cookhouse, you could always tell them, because they were all gallon cans, and then they had these big cans of milk, canned milk, and that was usually the cookhouse can dump.
So they had a designated.
Oh yeah, they had a designated place. That's the only place they dumped.
And you're speaking about the burning. Oftentimes, what I've seen too is it looks like these dumps have been burned, and of course many of them are crushed. So that was why I was asking if they had a policy. If they tried to burn as much as they could in these dumps, and then maybe crush them.
No, I didn't. I've never known them to burn the dumps. Okay. Never have, because of course sometimes it's a fire hazard.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking also, with the organic materials in the cans, it would be possibly a good breeding ground for bacteria, and possibly burning them might eliminate some.
Well, they used these slop holes for that. And then, of course, they were covered up when they filled up, and that's where all that stuff was. The organic material, I'm sure, was down
Well,
there.
just what was left in the can. You know, you open a can and you scoop the stuff out, but you never get it all out. There's always some residue in it, and especially in the summertime when it would be hot and it would seem like it would attract flies and other bacteria, possibly disease-carrying things.
Well, they were pretty particular about that. The people themselves, they would clean out the cans, and a lot of times they'd crush them.
With your foot.
Yeah. And we never had much problem with that way that I can remember.
That's like I say, that's just why I was wondering if they did have a policy of burning the stuff so that it might eliminate any kind of material that would have been left over in the cans. Not that you're aware of.
Not that I know of.
Okay.
And they had, of course, they had running water in the cookhouses and a lot of, they had, like their bathroom, they had a lot of toilets in there and showers. And they had water, they'd pipe that water and they'd build a great big, I guess you'd call it a cesspool, covered all that water to run into. And of course, there was pumice out there pretty much, and it was disposed of real quick. And then when they're through, they'd cover that up, or it was already covered, but they would make sure that it was taken care of, covered.
Okay. Well, when was it decided to relocate camps? I mean, when and why?
Well, now in earlier days, the weather, when they cut the timber, logging and get too much snow, they'd move it down lower to a lower climate, or lower area, and they'd still log. And then the spring, when the snow was gone, they'd move camp maybe right back up the same place again.
Okay. So you had high and low elevation camps.
Yeah, and
in the early days.
In the early days, because they had to get the men to work and whatnot, and you didn't have the transportation. And then in later, the company bought truck chassis and put a bus-like body on it, seats on it, so they could haul them into work.
What was that called? Do you remember?
Crummy.
A crummy.
Yeah.
Okay. Why was it a crummy?
Well, I guess it was crummy inside. I don't know. That's what they called it, a crummy. It's like they call a caboose.
How many men could fit in that?
Well, a whole crew for one of the machines. And I suppose there was maybe 20 people in there.
What was the typical size of a woods crew?
Well,
or was this for the woods crew?
Yeah, it would be for the woods crew. It worked, but I mean, each machine had a crummy.
Oh, okay. So there was more than one crummy.
Oh, yes. Yeah, they'd run to each machine. And they have 3 machines out there, but it'd be 3 crummies going to it. And then they had one for the fallers, too. They had a place on there for them to put their saws in when they took them in to get them sharpened. And they used them for, if anybody get hurt, too, they'd put them in there and take them into the hospital.
So what point in time are we looking at when they started using these crummies?
Well, when the camp was at La Pine, that's when they started using them.
And before that, how did the men get out to the woods operation?
A lot of them had work cars, they called them. And they had a whole bunch of guys driving each car, and then they'd pay the owner so much for gas and whatnot. They were usually the fellows had a car, and a family car, and they got ready to turn it in to get a new one. Instead of turn it in, they'd use it for a work car.
This was even in the 20s and 30s?
Well, in the early 20s, wasn't too many cars. There weren't too many. They'd haul them in to work on their locomotives.
Oh,
trains.
Okay.
Because there wasn't any roads out there like that, Not much. We'd go out and locate railroads and things, and there would be no roads. We'd have to go by foot all the way wherever we'd work and take the transit and stuff, carry it level.
So if timber operations got too far away from camp, then was a decision made then to
move, yeah,
to move the camp?
And they'd run water like the water from the cliff camp, as they call it. They run a pipeline down from Flannel Lake, a spring up there, and it's gravity fed all the way down. Then they moved to the pine camp. Well, they pulled all that pipe up and run it down to the pine camp. And the other camps, they had steam pumps that pumped the water to the camp. But this gravity from up there was a lot better because it was always there.
Yeah, yeah, a lot of power, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
So who made the decision to relocate?
Well, I suppose it's Jack Meister, probably. You know, he made those decisions, I'm pretty sure, along with Stanley Linton, the logging superintendent.
Well, Stanley Linton was the logging superintendent. So what was Jack Meister's title then?
Well, he was the head of the logging. I mean, he was in charge of the logging, the whole operation, the logging operation. And Stanley Linton was the superintendent of the logging out in the woods of all the men out there. But Jack Meister was over everybody. Railroad, logging, whatever it happened to be. I can't remember what his title was, but
He must have been the boss logger.
Yeah.
But no,
Nice guy too.
was he?
Very much.
Yeah. Yeah, I've read things in Pacific Lumber and Logging Congresses that he attended.
Yeah. He'd be mentioning his name, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I used to take the West Coast Lumberman for years. Finally, when I got out of logging,
Well, he must have been with the operation for just about ever.
Oh yeah. Well, he was. He back from Minnesota, same as George Conklin. He was just a kid back there, but he was working there. He got a degree in engineering or anything. He just picked it up with whoever he worked for.
Yeah, I remember reading things about Jack Meister and Pacific Lumber and Logging Congresses, and that was coming from times in the 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And how long do you recall that he was with the outfit?
As long as I can remember. Yeah.
So basically until they shut the doors?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a real good friend of my father's. He was a real nice guy. He wasn't a guy that would go out and just jump on somebody for somebody. He wasn't that kind of a guy.
So whatever was required in terms of getting things done in the woods, as you say, the railroad or the steel crew or the woods operations, that all fell under Jack Meister.
Well, Stanley Linton was in charge of that too.
Mm-hmm.
He was the one of the logging superintendent, and because Linton had, like, every loading machine had a foreman, a logging, one that had, and the grading crew had a foreman.
The grain crew, what did they do?
Grading. Well, they went out and
Grading. I'm sorry.
making railroad right away the grades for railroads, and Stanley was in charge of everything that was going out in personally. Take care of all the personnel in the woods and the camp, and Jack Meister was above him. He was what did they call him? I can't remember now. His title was.
What, did he have any mill responsibilities, or?
He did as far as the railroad coming in there and the logs and stuff. He did, yeah.
Okay. Well, as far as moving camp, what sorts of procedures, operations were required to move these houses on the rails and move them down?
Well, They would, at the other camps, they'd put in all the water lines and the streets, and then they would locate the houses for, the people would, how do you say that, mark out where certain people were to live, where they were to live. They'd mark them out, the lots.
And this was the people's choices.
Well, a lot of the times it was, yeah. And, of course, sometimes they had to have, well, like with George Conklin, we had his house was right in the neighbor, in the residential area. But it was usually near the office and things on that end of the camp. And that was the office, too. That's where we did a lot of our profile maps, all mapping and all that stuff, and engineering work.
And that was kept on the rails itself?
No, it was a regular house.
Oh, the office was?
Yeah. And George Conklin lived in it, one room, and then
Was there a special crew used to do the moving of the camp, or was it a kind of a community?
No, they'd shut down the logging, and all the loggers and everybody would work at it.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a community affair. Everybody worked at it.
So what kind of equipment did they use to load these things?
Well, they used that crane. In the early days, that's the only thing they had was a crane. But in later days, they had, when they went to truck logging, they had these shovel-like things, or loaders, I mean, they were on tracks, just like with a shovel, or backhoe. They were big, and they could load logs on the logging trucks. Well, they'd bring one of those in.
Now, when you say logging trucks, is that actually a truck like out on the road, or is that a rail truck?
No, it's a pneumatic tires, and it's a regular truck.
Okay.
A logging truck that they made. And that's later years that they did that. They'd bring the loader in, shovel loader they called it, and say at the camp that they were moving from. Well, see, then they had to have another loader up at the other camp where they unloaded them, and they'd take the crane up there. They used the crane on one end or the other, and the loader would load them on the railroad cars or take them off, wherever they were.
Was this loader on a railroad car, or was it?
No, it was on tracks, because they used it out in the woods. There wasn't any railroad where they're loading logging trucks.
Okay, this wasn't a McGiffert loader.
No, it wasn't.
What was a McGiffert loader used for?
Well, it took the logs that the trucks would bring in and load the logs on the railroad cars, then bring them into the mill. They might be 60 miles out there, and they didn't run the logging trucks were off-road logging trucks. You couldn't run them on the highway; they're too wide.
Okay. Well, you mentioned the trucks. I might as well ask you that question now. When did they start bringing those into the logging operations?
That was at the Lapine camp. They started doing that.
So it must have been sometime in the 30s?
Yeah, it was in the late 30s.
Did they bring many on? Or was it kind of a gradual process?
No, they changed over to truck logging and, at the Lapine camp, yeah. And they'd bring it into the railroad, where the loading area, where they had to load those trucks, or unload the trucks, and they'd put them on the railroad cars, and they usually had two McGiffords there, loading logs onto the railroad cars, because they had 2 or 3 of those shovel loaders out in the woods loading the trucks. And that's the way they did it.
So then about the late 30s, there weren't too many railroad grade spur lines being put in. They were mostly truck roads.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and they would run the railroad spurs into where they was going to load the cars with the trucks, and we didn't build spurs all over the woods. woods like we did before they got the logging trucks.
Okay, so down around Summit Stage Station camp.
Yeah.
Most of that must have just been truck roads down
Yeah,
there.
well, they had a railroad, and I helped build that darn thing.
Now that was the main line?
Main line come out to the camp, and then it went on down to, what's the name of that? We were going to build a trestle across this ravine down there and go on further south. But instead of doing that, we run it up to that ravine, the railroad right beyond the camp. And they had, that was a landing where they brought the logs in to load on the railroad cars. And it was cheaper to build logging roads than it was railroad.
Sure, I'll bet.
And so that's what they finished their logging roads. And down at Chemult they did the same thing. However, I quit before they moved the camp down to Chemult. We located it and everything, but we got the railroads in there and all the campsite all located, and then I just said that was too far to go, so I quit then.
Well, how was the selection of the new camp location determined? In other words, were there certain environmental features that were selected for this new camp?
Well, George and I would just go out and locate the thing where the most convenient place to put it. Of course, we had wells. We dug well. We had a spring out at Chemult camp, but they'd also dug wells there because the spring wasn't taking care of enough water in it. And
So water wasn't overly important as long as you could dig wells to get the water to it.
Well, because it required a lot of water because the locomotives did and the machines out in the woods did, and of course the camp. And they put in, I'm sure it was those pumps that go down in the bottom of the well, what do they call the darn things? Anyway, the pump was down in the bottom of the well and the wire went down, not electric wire. They were electric pumps.
Did the company have its own well digging equipment?
No, they hired that done. Because it was when they started having to use wells. Well, that was down at some of the stage station camp and the one down at Chemult up there by Sugar Pine Mountain. And that's the only place they ever dug wells.
So Chemult, although sounds like you really weren't there, they didn't lay out any spur lines off their main line railroad.
Yeah, we did. We run them out beyond Surveyor Spring and around the south end of Sugar Pine Mountain, because that was the end of the company's timber was right down there, and the Indian reservation is right next to it. We run the spur line out there, just and to the east or west the west of Sugar Pine Mountain, east of the camp went up in there. They had a land loading place up there. They had two big loading places there where they loaded logs.
And this was to put on the train?
Yeah, they put them on the train there.
But most of it was truck to train?
Yeah, that's what they just run it out there where it was convenient, and they'd stop it there and run and stick them in. We'd make generally a couple of spurs right there so they could put cars in on one of them and the machine on the other that was loading them. And then you have to build a tail track there so the cars run right underneath the jammer. It had legs, and the flat cars are running right in underneath them. And then as they need them, they pull them up and load them and put the stakes up. Have to get them out from under and load them.
Now, is a jammer, is that the same as a McGifford?
Yeah.
Okay, just a different name for the same piece of machinery.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so then, for the most part, there were only a couple of railroad spur lines off the main line down at Chemult?
Yeah, after you got out to the camp.
Okay.
They run the line out to camp, and then I remember, I don't recall any more out there.
Okay. Let's talk about schools for a little bit. Shevlin-Hixon provides schooling for the kids in the camp community?
Yeah.
And provided the schoolhouse?
Yeah, all clear up to the 8th grade. And then they sent them in the Bend. They'd have to go to Bend. Yeah, they had...
What about when they were at Lapine Camp? Did they go to Bend or...?
No, they went to Lapine.
Okay.
High school. See, they only had about 12 or 14 kids in high school, high school, until camp moved, and then it went up to about 85 students.
And these were high school students?
Yeah, high school students, and they, let's see, at the Lapine camp, they didn't have any school there. They sent them all to Lapine.
How'd they get there?
Had school bus.
Oh, they did?
Big school bus. 72 passenger school bus, I recall.
Is that a big bus?
Oh, it was a big one. Big old Rio.
What's Rio? Are those letters for something? Or?
Rio is a make. Rio trucks and Rio. They don't make them anymore.
Yeah, I just
you find them in crossword puzzles.
I just wondered if REO stood for something.
No, not that I know of, other than that they called it Rio. It was heavy equipment. Rio trucks were at one time. Yeah, and then at Lapine, or at the Cliff Camp, they sent the kids. They had the school in the Cliff Camp up to the sixth grade, and from the 6th grade in high school they went to Lapine. Then when they got to Lapine Camp, why everybody went to school in Lapine. And then when they got out to to the Summit Station, they had I don't know how far they went. They had a school there for the small kids because they didn't want to send them to quite a way, send them to school. And they all went to Gilchrist then, the high school and everything.
Okay.
And then when they got to Schmaltz, I don't know whether they had I think everybody went to Gilchrist. I don't think they had a school. They might have. I wasn't there when they moved out there, so I don't know exactly what they did. I don't remember anyway.
So going from Summit Station in Schmaltz to school in Gilchrist, was that a company, Gilchrist company operated school?
Well, it's in the Klamath school district, and Klamath Falls takes, that's in their district, so they take care of the school. But I'm sure that Gilchrist furnished the buildings and everything.
Yeah,
I'm not sure, but I'm sure they did. Yeah,
yeah, the company town.
Because it's still there. Yeah.
Okay.
And kids from Schmaltz was riding the same school buses in Gilchrist. I don't know whether they do now or not. I haven't been out there.
So the schools then that were in the camps, in the Shevlin camps, they were part of the local Bend Lapine school district?
Oh, yes.
What would you estimate the average size of a student body being out there?
At camp?
Yeah.
Well, when they had the 8th grade, went clear to the 8th grade, they had 3 big schoolrooms. The small kids, they went in that one room, and then gradually they divided up the 8. I don't know just how they divided them, but the same teacher. Each room had one teacher, and there was 2 or 3 grades in there, what are they, about 3 grades in each room.
So the teachers live out there in camp also?
Oh, yeah. Some of them, their husbands worked there, and they had their families. They were good teachers, real good teachers.
What kinds of things do you remember? What kind of subjects were taught there?
Well, I guess the same as in the schools today, except the scientific part of it. They don't have any of that in there. Just regular regular subjects is what they had: geography, arithmetic, and English, and writing, and
Any other kind of school activities for kind of extracurricular things?
No, we didn't have any of that, anything like that. Except when it was in Pine, they did, of course, but not at the camp. They didn't have any playground equipment or anything like that. We'd have a baseball game or some place cleared for that, but that was about all.
Any kind of music or anything taught at the school?
No, there wasn't. In fact, the only place I knew of a piano was in our house and in the church. We had a church there too. In there, they'd have programs at the church where we'd all get in together with it, or we'd always participate in. But
well, tell me something about the church services out there at the camp.
Well, it was non-denomination. It was Catholic kids, and there was Protestant kids, and whatever else there was. And it was great. Old George Redden, who was a pastor at the Pines, he was a pastor out there, and he just did a lot of good. I tell you, it made it interesting for everybody. We'd have programs out there during the week sometimes too. Night, evenings, you know. And in the summertime, we'd have a summer school out there, which took up a lot of the kids' time. And arts and crafts they did then. And George Redden used to take some of us older fellows, the kids, and go fishing, camping. And,
anybody ever baptized or married out there in the camp?
Gosh, I don't know whether they were or not. I was already baptized before I got there, so I don't think they were. They might have been, but I don't recall it.
But for the most part, then, if you were a Catholic or Protestant or Lutheran, you might go to the same service.
Oh yes, we go to the same thing. Participate in the Sunday school and everything.
And was there a regular building out there that was the church building, or was it? Did that building serve some other function?
Serves as a community hall.
Okay.
Too, and had lots of seats in there, and they had a stage in there, and we'd have Christmas programs there and whatnot like that. You know, it was for the community, and everybody seemed to participate in it. It was filled up usually, the standing room only.
Okay, well, we've talked about family homes and bachelor's quarters, the cookhouse, school, and church services. Can you recall what other buildings were there in the camps and what functions they served? We talked about the roundhouse.
Well, they had a blacksmith shop there, and they would make horseshoes and all that. Oh, anything, and a machine shop too was in it. And welding, and they had two machinists there and welders. There's two fellows that run the blacksmith shop and welding shop.
What did the black?
Oh yeah.
Did they have a farrier out there?
Yeah, they did everything. Yeah, they did. And then they had a cat house. That's where they repaired the tractors and whatnot. Cats.
Had me going there for a
They
minute.
called it a cat house.
Okay, I was just going to ask you about that.
Yeah, they had some diesel mechanics and whatnot that worked in there. And one of the cat drivers, his cat needed repairing or anything, they brought it in, he'd go with it and help them repair it. And then they'd generally bring it in on a railroad car if it was any distance out. And it wasn't runnable, you know.
So if they had old fellas, a blacksmith shop that was producing horseshoes, as an example, they must have had some buildings for the horses.
Oh yeah, they had barns. Yeah, they had. Of course, in the latter years, they eliminated that.
Yeah, I was going to ask about what time, if you could remember, were horses kind of phased out.
Well, they used them as long as they had the ledgerwoods out there. That's a different type of a logging machine. It's a high line. They use it up on the steep country. They'd run the cable up for put on a spar tree, and then they'd run the bicycle up there and pull the logs back down. And they had the horses to pull the straw lines out so they could get the big lines, the main line out, you know. They'd have run around pulleys and then bring the cable back, and then they'd hook it onto the ledgerwood, and it would, those drums would bring them out and pull them out. I guess they got through the ledgerwoods in the early 30s.
Okay. So when the ledgerwoods went, the horses went.
Yeah, the horses went. They used horses down in, I guess, in the mill, pulling lumber around. But Brookses did. I guess Shevlin did too, but I don't know how long they kept them down there. They were beautiful horses.
These were big horses?
They were big old Clydesdale, just as gentle as could be. They knew more about logging than men. Logging is dead. They go right out where to go.
Well, it must have taken a kind of a specialized or kind of handy sort of fella to work with the horses.
Yeah, it did. And they had a little barn out there. They made a little building that they called a barn. It had a manger in it and feed and whatnot. And they'd put the horses in there at night, or the horse, when it was, wintertime especially. And then water out there for them. And then they'd bring them into the camp at the barn, and on weekends and holidays and stuff, they'd stay in there.
Who cared for the horses?
Well, they had a barn man.
Was this the same fellow that cared for the pigs?
No, I don't think that was his steady job. He just took care of the horses.
Okay, so did he do the shoeing also? And
I can't remember what he did or not. Somebody did, but I don't remember who it was. And then, like making chokers and working with putting eyes on cables, so they had a man to do that too. He was pretty handy when you have to make those eyes on the end of cables. You loop them over and make an eye, and then
splice them again.
Splice them in there. He was real good at it too. He had all those tools. Used to be like to go down there and watch him work at it. He was good at it.
Yeah, I imagine. Yeah, whatever you did in the woods, you probably had to be pretty good and pretty innovative.
And they had those chokers with a ball on the end. You've seen they called it a ball in the D. They pushed that ball underneath in the choker on this log, and then took it into D, and then it tightened up just like a slip knot, on the rope. And he'd make those. I used to watch some. They'd bend the wire, the cable over in that ball, and then they'd pour it full of babbitt. And then so it wouldn't pull off. Mm-hmm. It was quite interesting.
Well, what about, were there medical facilities in camp?
There was a lady there that was a registered nurse. Her husband was a timber faller, and I guess he'd scale too. And that was more or less just for the family around, the kids and whatnot. Get a burn or a scratch or something, they go over and see Mrs. Munyer and get it fixed. But they didn't have anything other than their first aid kits and stuff. And I know people that get hurt in the woods before they really had good transportation. They would just load them on the train, take them right into the mill and into the hospital. See, the company had a hospital in the town. And it's called what did they call that? Well, anyway, they had a hospital down here. Well, I don't know. I know where it was, right where the railroad went across the river there in the mills. Across the right, so right just where you cross the river and sit right alongside.
Just on the, what would that be? The east side of the trestle?
Yeah, east side, southeast side of the trestle there. It was on that mill. The school district used the building there for a long time. But that was the only. Somebody got killed in the woods while they seems to me like they took him to town on the train. I don't think a coroner came out. He may have, but I didn't know about it. But
Or was working in the woods a pretty dangerous occupation?
some machines it was like that. They had a machine they called a Clyde, and it had booms on each end, and they'd swing the stuff out to pick up the logs, and it'd hit the guys a lot of times. And in the woods, ledge woods, they'd be bringing in logs and hook up on something, and the machine was so powerful it'd snap that cable, and it would go right and ramp around through the woods. If anybody's in the way, it got them.
So fellas got killed out there once in a while.
Oh, once in a great while we did, not too often. They were pretty alert to any problems that they might have that would create any hazards. And it's been a long time. I worked there for quite a while, not too long. And I don't recall anybody getting killed while I worked there. Well, I lived there for a while, but while I was working.
Well, how could, maybe you could give me an idea as far as you mentioned the Clyde and the Ledgerwood of what other ways could a fella get hurt out in the woods?
Oh, with limbs falling out of a tree and hitting them when they're cutting timber or logs.
What was that called? Do you remember? Was that called anything in particular? Something?
Well, they call them widowmakers a lot of times.
Okay.
Limbs up in the tree.
That was that kind of a prevalent occurrence in terms of.
It didn't happen very often.
Oftentimes dead wood up above you.
Yeah, something like that. And if it got real windy, why they wouldn't let the fallers go out there, because you never know which way a tree was going to fall when you cut it. And they were pretty cautious.
Mm-hmm. So using axes and saws and things like that really didn't present too many problems.
No, they get cut with axes once in a while. I got cut with one, and their axes were sharp. Oh, they were just like a razor. And the saws, they had two saw filers in the camps that filed saws. They were company saws, and everything. These guys filed them. And you'd hear the timber fallers once in a while complain, well, so-and-so the raker's too long and all this and that. Well, it was just a routine the way they filed them,
Mm-hmm.
They had gauges they go on about. Some they claim were better than others. I mean, the fallers, one guy, he liked this saw filer better than he did the other one. And they had a shed there, a building there that had a little old one-cylinder gas engine, go put along, and it's on a cable and a belt on it that went to a arbor where they had several stones, and they had water going on them, dripping on them out of a can, and they'd sharpen their axes on that, they would grind them down. And the guys, the fallers, had to do their own sharpening of the axes.
Oh, did they?
Yeah.
Well, when a couple fellas or fellow working with a rubber man was cutting a tree, ponderosa, lots of sap in it. How'd they keep their saw from gooing up?
Well, they had saw oil they put on it. Saw oil, yeah. And it's kind of like this diesel fuel.
And they
the company furnished it, and they'd get these whiskey flasks, flat kind of, and they'd put it in, and they'd stick some straw or pine needles in it down in there, and then they'd stick that in their hind pocket, and usually they had a little extra cloth there to soak up soil because it'd leak on it, and then they just went that on the saw.
Every once in a while, or
yeah.
How could they go through a tree without using any of this solvent, or did they have to do it every once in a while?
Every once in a while they do it. They'd pull the saw out and take one side and turn it over and hit it on the other side and then go right back to work.
Okay, so that'd cut through the pitch, huh?
Oh, yeah, it would make it a lot easier saw, yeah.
And
the company furnished it. They'd get it 55-gallon drums, and they had little oil cans that the company furnished, little 1-gallon cans, and at night they'd fill up their, go in, they'd come in, they'd fill up their can of soil, and be all ready for the next day.
But these fellas also put them like in whiskey pint flat bottles?
Yeah, well, there was whiskey flasks, they called them. Okay. They were whiskey flasks. There's a lot of them, I guess. You don't see them anymore, but they were flat and they fit in your pocket.
Must have been about a pint-sized bottle.
Yeah, they were a pint. Yeah, okay. Pint. I'm sure that's what they were, a pint.
I see those out in the woods every once in a while.
Yeah, you probably do.
And they just stuck pine needles in them to
they'd take the cork out and stick the pine needles in, because then just about the right amount of oil would come out.
Okay, so those pine needles actually served a function.
Oh yes.
Okay, they weren't just stopper in the bottle.
No,
they spread the stuff out.
Yeah, they did.
Okay. Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, so for the most part, there was generally a sizable population of people with numerous buildings out in the middle of the forest.
Yeah.
And the forest is sometimes prone to burning. Did Shevlin-Hixon have any policies and procedures to guard and protect their property against fire?
No, they didn't. The people out there were just careful.
Okay. Camp was never in danger of being burned by a forest fire?
It seems like one time that they did have a fire come fairly close, but everybody got out with their shovels and took care of it. They didn't have the fires they have today. Of course, the forests were a little more clean than they are now. When they cut the trees out, a lot of brush comes in and makes a lot of tinder. Where in those days it wasn't like that. And I know the fires, the kids would get around, start fires or something out around the camp. The women would get out there and put the damn thing out. I mean, they were the firefighters.
Did they have any hydrants or anything in the camp?
Well, they had water, not fire hydrants, just water to get water for the houses when they didn't. And when it wasn't piped into the house, they had little hydrants all around through the camp where you went and got a bucket of water.
Okay, so during fire season, you don't recall there being safety meetings or things where they bring people together?
No, not that I know. Everybody was aware of it, I'm sure, because that was their home and they weren't going to have it burned down.
Yeah, well, from the signs of tobacco tins out there, it was pretty clear that a lot of people were smoking.
Oh, yeah.
So they must have been pretty careful.
Yeah, they usually had pipes, and I guess if they had cigarettes, they probably rolled them. I don't know. I didn't smoke, so.
Yeah, but smoking out in the woods during fire season wasn't against company policy.
No, it wasn't. Let me see. It seems like I know George was a heavy smoker. He smoked, light one cigarette right after the other. And he was smoking. And whenever we'd stop to smoke, we'd sit down and clear out a big area, a pine needle and duff, and get down to the good old earth, and he'd smoke and put it out. But being a chain smoker like that, I had to watch him, because he'd light a cigarette and off the other and never know it, never realize it. And I can remember one time down, I don't know whether you know where Pumice Butte is out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, we was working there. We was locating some truck roads there, and we would go down and run some lines down about 5 miles south of there. And it happened to be right on the section line, like where we'd been working. We was up there on this hill running some lines, and George come down, and we stopped and he smoked, and we got clear down there, about that 5 miles down there, I think it was, and we started north. I was running compass for him then, and I could see this little spurl of smoke on it. It had to be right square in line, or I was running on the same section line. So we went back up there, and I'm sure that, well, I don't say I can't be sure either, but I just assumed that he started a cigarette and I didn't catch him at it. And it started a fire. And so we went back down there where we were, where the fire was. It was off the road about, half a mile, I guess. And run a line into it, spotted up a line, and the Forest Service came and put it out. But and another time, rather in the same place, I was locating some truck roads up there around Thomas Butte, that area. And I could working up there, and I could hear this motor going. Oh my gosh, there's nothing around here like a motor, I know. And I kept on and finished my work, and it started to come out, and I could smell smoke. I got down to the road, and where I'd left my canteen on a little covert they had there, and that's where they was going to pick me up. And I just stopped, turned around, and I got in the car, and it was strong with smoke. And we went back down the road, and right where he and his boy had spotted up this truck road when that fire started. And how it got started, I don't know. Yeah. But anyway, the Forest Service was coming. But what I heard was they had a tank truck with a little gas motor on it, with a hose to spray down the fire. That's what it was.
Yeah, that's why I was curious, because it seemed like logging and lumber companies were, always concerned about the potential of their property being burned up.
That's right.
And so I was just curious if they had any kind of fire precaution policies or anything.
No, they didn't. Did have a fire near one of the rigs where they had tank cars, with water, and they had pumps on the engines. And they could run on the cars. They did too. They had little steam pumps that they just hooked the locomotive up to it and furnished the power for it and apply the steam, and they would really put out the water. And around landings, it wasn't necessarily a man caused. It was a lot of times from machinery. Like the sparks out of their machines. They had spark arresters and everything on them, and they were. Then at night they had a man come out, a night watchman, watch for fires. And they were pretty alert as far as fires were concerned, I'll tell you. But they didn't have as many as you'd think they would with that many people in the woods. And I think everybody was conscious of the danger.
Okay. Well, we touched briefly on forms of entertainment during the course of our conversation. What other kinds of community entertainment were available to the folks? What did people do in the evening after work?
They played a lot of cards. They'd have card parties and go to different people's houses, and they'd play cards and have a lot of refreshments. And the kids, if they were small, they'd just take them with them and lay them someplace in the house on the bed, and they'd sleep. And then they had horseshoe games, and of course softball. We had a lot of softball, and finally we built us a baseball diamond, and we had we'd have games all over Central Oregon, Bend, Prineville, Redmond, and Gilchrist.
Were these activities the kind of thing that could occur on any day, or were there kind of designated days?
Well, it's usually on weekends at the ball games, and then we had the coach, the fellow that was in charge of it, and some pretty good ball players. We had a lot of fun doing it. And then they would do a lot of, in the summertime, they had swimming parties down in the river. Everybody go down there, picnic, and then fish, of course.
What about your everyday average night of the week? What did folks do after work?
Well, usually there wasn't too much activity at night. They were pretty tired, most of them, and there usually wasn't any However, they did have a pool hall there in the camp, and they served beer and they had pool tables. They played cards, and that was just for the men. The women didn't. And
was that owned by the company?
Yeah.
The pool hall was?
Yeah. And Shorty Wilson he was a Luke, I guess you call him, run the dining room in that particular. So each camp, when they had separate camps, they had a separate cookhouse and dining place. And then there at Lapine Camp is when they put in the pool hall, and they had the store come in there, Ben Olson's. Well, he was at Lapine, at the Cliff Camp. They started the store. Clint did. See, the camps, that's where they come together. And they had 2 timekeepers, so they had to... they finally made it just to have 1 timekeeper because it was on the camp. And Clint started the store. And Bill Bear was the timekeeper then. They were both timekeepers, but Bill took over. And then Bill moved to Bend and opened up a bar in Bend, the Waldorf. And then Clint took over the timekeeping again, and I don't know, some outside people come in and run the store for the company.
Okay. The pool hall have slot machines?
They had slot machines.
Okay.
Yeah,
Now,
they did.
Let me make sure I'm getting this straight. The pool hall and slot machines, they weren't owned or operated by somebody else. They were owned and operated by the company.
Yeah, and I guess Shorty Wilson might have owned some of it too. I don't know. He ran the pool hall, and he was the cook too. Harry Weaver was his assistant, and they cooked and run the pool hall too. And it was.
So, having slot machines, I don't know. There wasn't anything illegal about that.
No, they were allowed then.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they were.
Okay.
They were legal then. And
people win nice pots out there.
oh well, they have they did. I think the jackpot was probably around $10 or $15 or so. In those days, I guess that was quite a
10
bit.
or $15 is
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah.
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 Okay.
And the company, and Shorty had chips, money, little chips they call them, and then playing cards. They'd tell somebody keep putting those chips in 10 cents a piece or something, and you could use it for buying. They'd buy cigarettes or beer or anything with them. I mean, it was good fun in the pool hall there.
What did these chips look like?
Well, it was a little red piece of cardboard about that long, about that wide, and then they made some metal ones too. I don't know what they were made of, but the guys played cards. They had card tables there. I don't know what they played pinochle and I don't know what the names of them because I didn't play them, but anyway, they'd bet those chips, put the chips in them, and Shorty or Harry Weaver, every little bit they'd go around, and the guys have a pot with it, they'd drag 1 or 2 out, to pay for the cards and things, I suppose. I don't know.
Well, what about Saturday nights? This is when folks would get together.
Well, Saturday night, usually, well, they'd come home, they'd go to town and do their shopping or whatever they needed to do, and they had, I guess they probably had nights that they had regular card games. I don't know, the families did. And they did a lot of visits and like that, In the wintertime in particular, they did a lot of skiing around. They'd go out on ski parties and whatnot. We had ski jumps there, ski runs, and toboggan runs. We had probably a lot more fun than the kids in town because we had it right there.
Yeah, they do a lot of hunting out during the winter.
Oh, yeah. Skiing. I used to go skiing way in the middle of the night and come home, and cold and good skiing though when it was like that. Just squeaking as you go on.
Yeah. Well, speaking of hunting, let me just back up here for a minute to depression. And you mentioned that nobody had anything, and but everybody stayed around. But the company also supplied much of the supply. Much of poaching occurred back then.
But it was done for their need. It wasn't done just to do it. And the game wardens would come out, and they'd find people, they'd come out there and catch them, and they wouldn't do anything with them because they need it.
Tough times.
Yeah, they needed it. And if they find them or anything, they wouldn't get any money anyway because nobody had any. Families needed the meat, and it was everybody seemed to have it. I mean, there wasn't somebody courting it all. They shared it with everybody that needed it.
So the amount of hunting went up, you think, during the Depression years because of more time, perhaps?
Yeah, well, and it was a necessity. They didn't, if they wanted meat, hunting, why they'd wait until hunting season, but when they went out and poached, it was for their need. It wasn't for the sport of shooting them.
Yeah, okay.
And it wasn't too much of it either. There was some, my dad wouldn't think of anything like that, and some of the fellows thought that Dad was turning them in. Well, he didn't turn anybody in. He didn't believe in it, but he wouldn't turn anybody in because he knew what he needed.
Yeah. Your dad didn't poach though.
No,
during the Depression.
You couldn't get him to do anything like that. Lord help us if any of us kids did it too.
Even if you had the need, or was the need just not that great to go out and poach a deer?
It just wasn't that great for my dad.
Yeah.
He wouldn't do it.
Okay. Well, I've read in the early stuff about Shevlin-Hixon. They used to have some pretty fancy picnics.
Oh yeah, you bet.
What can you tell me about those?
It was down here at Benham Falls. That's where the old railroad went across the Butte. At Benham Falls, they had a big bridge.